Hello and welcome to the TAVCOM Training Podcast Series. TAVCOM Training is part of the Links International Group, offering both traditional, classroom and online programs in security systems training. We have worked with our tutors to put together a range of short 15 to 30-minute podcasts on specific aspects of technical security, which we hope you will find both interesting and informative. Our aim is to provide you with practical, relevant and engaging learning that has a positive impact on you and the role you have in the security environment. After engaging with our podcast, you may be interested in our extensive range of distance and online packages. For more information, visit our website www.tavcom.com. Enjoy the presentation.
Hello and welcome to this video podcast. I'm David White and I'm a senior tutor and consultant with TAVCOM Training, and I focus on the management and operations side of their portfolio. The typical courses that I would teach in the management side would be the management of CCTV control rooms or any security control room with CCTV systems and video surveillance systems coming in, project management for security professionals, and security consultancy. And it's the latter, the consultancy course, that I want to focus on today. What I want to introduce you to is the course itself, and then we will look at some of the themes, and in particular, the security surveys that consultants conduct whilst carrying out their business. First of all, the consultancy course is aimed at security professionals that have got a range of skills and often a subject matter expertise of their own, developed over many years, from the engineering side, from the installation side, from the governance side, where they now feel that they have sufficient confidence and expertise to go into the marketplace as an independent advisor and charging fees for their services from the clients. Now, the course itself would operate over 5 days, typically in a classroom, and it's at level 5 and with a professional award. And that would not deliver automatically a consultant at the end of it. You don't come in on a Monday morning, arguably, and then do a course for 5 days and then go out on a Friday afternoon as a fully fledged consultant. We consider what is a consultant, what do consultants have to do when they're carrying out their work, what the clients expect of a consultant. So across the course, there's a range of topics, of course, that we use and develop and discuss to create a toolkit, if you like, for individuals who've got this expertise and want to go out there and work individually, often independently from any manufacturer, supplier, integrator, so that the client increasingly these days wants to be confident they are getting unbiased advice and biased opinions, not tainted necessarily by particular product, influenced by particular manufacturers perhaps, and in that way they can be confident that the advice they are getting is credible and worthy, and indeed worthy of the investment they may make into any solutions that the consultant is suggesting to them. So in the context of the course itself, we would look at a range of skills, responsibilities, expectations, and break that down and discuss it all individually across the scope of the course, and hopefully give you a good, strong toolkit going forward to work as a consultant. One of the things that a consultant has to conduct and whilst they're working, of course, is a site security survey. And that's the area of activity, a consultant activity, that we're going to examine in this podcast. So what I'd like to do is just set the scene with you and just imagine that you are working as a consultant and you've been invited in to a client site to advise them on their security requirements. They feel perhaps as though there's insufficient security on their site, and they want your advice to help them, if necessary, make the right improvements to make their business more secure. Now, one thing that we discuss here, this is often done, this particular part of the course is done in the middle of the learning program, by which time we'll have discussed lots of roles and responsibilities and interaction with clients. And in particular, we'll have discussed an awful lot of different security solutions, technical solutions. And often if somebody is coming to consultancy from an engineering, installation, integration, strongly technical background, then of course their initial reaction is, let's think about what we can put where, what cameras can we put in, what biometrics can we add, what access control can we put in, where can we make all these technical improvements with gadgets and gizmos to ideally impress the client, or indeed see that as the first line of solution provision and solution design when it comes to working with a client. And that's where I would put the brakes on and say, look, let's just think about this. Going into a client who is asking for your advice, what are the methodologies? What are the considerations that we have to go through when it comes to advising a client? So you arrive there, you're there with the client, and they're looking for you for your expertise. What method steps are you going to deploy? What considerations are you going to take? What do you want to know about? What will inform your decision making in terms of solution design? And this is where we would offer the learners an exercise, a tabletop exercise, where they will be given a site plan and given different scenarios to overlay that site plan and then apply it to some thinking. But on any situation, on any given situation where they're considering what they would do with regard to a site survey or security survey, then there are some really important steps to consider. Now, think for yourself for a moment. What would be your first step? What would you do? What would you think about? What would you ask the client about? Or would you just go straight into perhaps looking around and suggesting, well, perhaps we could put some additional technology here, there, and whatever. So let's take this opportunity then just to pause and consider. And here I'm going to share some slides with you, some typical slides that I would use on the classroom training program to support the points I'd like to make, and hopefully just sow some seeds in your own mind if you are not familiar with this process, what method steps and what considerations are available to you. And here I'm going to share some slides with the screen and go into, and hopefully you will be able to see, that's not the one I want you to see. That's, that comes a little bit later in the program. Let me go to the correct one and go there. And say to the starting point for any design approach with consultancy has to be understanding the threats to the client business, the client site, whatever. If it's a client site, a client business, it's all the same thing. What are their security threats? What might be the vulnerabilities that might exploit those threats? And therefore, overall together, the interaction between the two would create what we would typically call a security risk. And so everything we would tend to do would be based upon the overall predication of a security risk assessment. Now, let's just examine for a moment what we mean by these terms. So a threat then is something, anything really that can be impending, any potential intent or capability to cause damage or harm to that business, to that site, or any asset within that business or site. The vulnerability would be the weaknesses, the susceptibility for that threat to take place, for that attack to happen, or any harm caused to any asset, including the people and the structure of that business. So the risk assessment is that element of interaction between the threat and the vulnerability and that potential exploitation that might take place to create that security risk. So we talk in terms of an STA, a security threat assessment, security risk assessment, and that approach and those considerations right from the outset, looking at the overall business itself, looking at those threats and vulnerabilities, what are the risks potentially to that client, and then building a solution from that point of view. So let's move this forward and look at the other elements. So we've got an idea of this security risk assessment we would carry out for the client. what would we consider beyond that? What other elements of them, before we even think about a technical solution, what else would we have to consider? And this is where, in the classroom environment, sat down with some desktop examples, I'd be pushing the participants to actually think about, well, there you are, you've got a business in a given place, in a given location, it would be described. You can think of any business that you might go to yourself as a consultant and think, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to know from the client themselves? What other inquiries might I make? And you can think about that now. Where else would you go? What else would you do? What do you need to understand? Is it just about, okay, we've done the risk assessment and then going straight again to technical solutions to minimize the risk? I would argue that's not the right way forward. Let's just think about other things as well. Technical solutions are clearly going to form part of many of our recommendations. But before we get to that point, let's have a look. Look at some of the other things that need to be considered. What is that business all about? What is its functionality? What is its processing? We could come up with a solution that would include lots of modern technology as a first thought, and we could lock down the business. We could actually create a business that is actually, but then it can't function. We could put many features of technology into the business from an outside perspective, and then coming into the middle perspective. But how does that business function? We need to understand that. Who are the people? How many people? What's their role? What's their responsibilities? What's the people flow around the business? We don't want to over-secure it whereby the business can't function any further. And if we're going to deploy technology, particularly these days with video surveillance systems, biometric systems with access control and video analytics and facial recognition, we have to, right from the outset, consider the law. What are the impacts of the current legislation on using such technologies? Certainly now with the Data Protection Act of 2018 in the UK, together with the General Data Protection Regulations across the EU, which the UK, of course, is going to fully embrace, there are some serious impacts in relation to compliance and governance of security systems right from the word go. So we have to demonstrate our understanding of that right from the word go, build in and bake in, if you like, is the term that they use, baking in from the word go, what are the impacts of using such technologies? May be appropriate to consider British standards. And what British standards may be applying to these particular technologies or any solution that we may be talking about from a control room design point of view, for example. If a control room is part of the solution going forward, or an improved security control room facility, then standards, guidelines, legislation will impact upon that too. What process and procedures they have in place already? What is going on? Who will be developing procedure if this new technology is going to be implemented as part of a solution based upon the threat assessment? Then what does that look like? What does a client expect? How does a client want its business to run, and who's going to take different responsibilities for those? And indeed, of course, as you'll probably appreciate, if there's existing technology in the site at the business, then how compatible is that for anything that we may be considering going forward? Do we have to sort of strip out all the old legacy security provision before we can implement a more enhanced modern security provision, or can it be integrated itself into, as it stands, into other more modern technologies? So we have to consider all these things before we start saying, right, let's put a camera here, let's put an access control pad here, let's put some perimeter detection systems on that fence line. We have to consider all these different approaches. Now, in taking that forward, what we want to consider, of course, are the different methodologies. And learners on the course would be pushed towards researching some of these and finding out for themselves what different method steps, if you like, different approaches can be used to adopt a structured approach to doing a security survey. I'm going to talk you through a couple of well-known, tried and tested approaches. People have their own. People have, people blend different method steps. You may have your own that you would adopt, but the common ones and well-known ones are, what we're looking at here is the onion peeling principle, or the onion peeling method. Now, I always laugh when I suggest this to learners in the group, that they might go looking for this type of approach, and they Google onion peeling principle, and they present back to me on how they can peel an onion for doing the cooking or making a curry. That's clearly not what we're talking about here. This is a common method, well practiced in police crime reduction, crime prevention practices, typically applied to buildings, businesses, dwellings, to resist burglary in particular. But it speaks to many other contexts as well, and you can get a feel for the principle of the onion layer, that layered approach in terms of thinking about how do I prepare for this survey? What do I need to understand? We've already discussed the security risk assessment approach, but in that context, what about the environment in which this business sits? Look at the bigger picture. What else is happening around it? Where's it situated? What's happening in the locality? What are the crime statistics? What are the impacts? What are the feelings from other businesses in the area about their own measures for security? How risky is it? How risky an area is it? With risk in mind, you have to consider how risk averse the client is, and take that into account when you're doing that. So it's this whole concept of looking from the outside in, wheeling it right the way down through the whole bigger picture where the business sits, to the perimeter of the business, and then that layered approach through right the way through to the building, the structure of the building, inside the building, how the building is laid out, and where are the important assets? Where are they? What needs to be protected most? And of course, as it says at the bottom there, and the people and the procedures. It's a very comprehensive, layered approach. One worth considering, and one that we talk about and illustrate with examples when we do our course in the classroom. An alternative, it's a variation on the same theme. It's about the ABC method. Quite simple, really. Again, that layered approach, the area, the geographical location, and the infrastructures, and what's going on around it, the boundary, how good is it? And as we touched on a moment ago with technology, if we are considering much more comprehensive perimeter intrusion detection systems, then clearly we're not going to be putting those onto an old ragged fence line. They're not going to work. So before we even think about sort of certain types of technology, we need to think about what is the boundary and the fence line in this context around PIDs. What does it look like? How's it going to be? If it's ragged, we need to change it. But then, of course, there's a cost implication to doing that as well. So, and then finally, of course, again, the C, we come inside the building, we look at the context, we look at the values, we look at the assets, and how easy it is to get into those places. So it's just, again, another methodology, similar principles to the onion peeling approach, but again, it just gives structure to the approach. And it helps if you use a clipboard in this context and sort of think about it in that way. Certainly I do. I use templates that I take with me that I'm familiar with that help me make sure that I consider all the options and don't miss anything when I'm conducting such a security survey and working with a client to make sure I capture all the points. The other one, which some of you may well have come across already through other learning, other activity, but again, it's the 4 Ds, and there's variations on this theme, but the common standard approach, if you like, is this idea that we deter, we delay, we detect and defend. So clearly deterrence, putting a deterrence in place is obviously the ideal solution. We want to do as much as we possibly can to dissuade people from making an attack on our business, be it a cyber attack or indeed a physical attack on our business. And we can have those physical deterrents, those obvious in-your-face physical barriers, gates, or indeed more subtly, the existence of video surveillance, or so that suggests maybe, well, what if I did do this? Am I going to be seen? Am I going to be captured? And of course, we would be discussing elsewhere in our program all about the fors and against in terms of the different sort of security technologies we might use in any security solution. And it also includes the messaging that we put out there. What messages are we going to have physically at our site? What signs are we going to do? What are we going to put out on our website? What does our company say about security? And so if anybody is perhaps doing some research with a view to carrying out a hostile act against our business, then what are we saying about our security? How do we portray that in all the messaging that we do in relation to security? But obviously, if an attack does take place, we need to delay it, and the next step should be then to make sure that the attack is made as difficult as possible. So putting things in the way to slow things down a little bit. Any barriers, gates, doors, bollards, obstacles, to give people time to react and to put in a security response. And get people safely out of an area if they need to. So that delay is that next layer, if you like, in terms of what might be recommended for the client to consider going forward to provide an effective security solution. And of course, if that delay mechanism doesn't work, then we've got to make sure that our detection systems that we put in do, and that they activate and provide that notification, if you like, both electronically and physically from security officers, security staff, and obviously to be told there's an attack begun, then the response program gets in. And finally, of course, we have the defend, the critical measures that are there to protect those valuable assets on the site. We've discussed the layered approach, the onion peeling, the ABC, but whatever security solutions, any security strategy that we might be talking about with a client would also, of course, be dependent upon the security threat assessment and taking into account the layered approach that we have discussed. So these are tools that we are looking to give the consultant to say, there is some structure to this, there is some recognized methodology to this. If you're going to engage with a client, then be professional. Use these tools and techniques in a way that you can be flexible. You can make them and take them to suit your own practice. I certainly have in the way that I do it. It's a blend of all these in my thinking and in my rationale when I'm going to work with a client in the context of delivering a security survey. Another area that is to be considered, and it's not often one that is on many people's radar when it comes to security solutions. Again, we've probably heard of some of these. Certainly this one it's secure by design. It's a police supported brand, if you like. It earns the police service nationally income from the use of this logo, the use of the branding to say that you have actually had your premises secured by design, that you have actually had it accredited. It's a badge of honor. Some people value that badge of honor. You commonly see it in car parks where you have a new multi-story car park perhaps that has been built with secure by design standards and has been accredited, inspected and accredited, and then been given the logo and the award to secure by design. That's again going back to that messaging and that deterrence effect under the 4Ds. Then that's a strong message to say that actually this place is a really well-designed car park. It's secure, and if you want to go do anything naughty in relation to car parks, then perhaps you might want to go somewhere else. And that deterrent effect can be made there. That's a consideration. And these are ones that, if as a tutor on the consultancy course, is the sort of thing I'll be expecting the participants to have thought about and maybe come across, and then I would obviously be responding to their work in relation to these things. Another which I think has got great value. I've practiced it myself. I came across it all many years ago now in the early 2000s. I did a little bit of study on it, and you can get full qualifications on it now. But this is the CPTED, the crime prevention through environmental design. Now, it sounds all very, perhaps to engineers and technicians, a little bit wild and woolly. but trust me, it does work. It's worth considering as a consultant, working with clients, advising them on any potential future solutions, looking at things broadly speaking, where appropriate, of course. These measures can have value. Designing out crime, the environment, what environmental measures can we come across? We come across things like, now, if it's a brand new site, of course, then clearly there are some design measures we could consider. If we're looking at an existing site, and I've worked with this in the context of blocks of high-rise dwellings, flats, blocks of flats, where there are lots of social problems in a given area, and the client wishes to try and minimize the risk to residents, improve their quality of life, and how can they put in security measures to meet those needs. And it would be no good going into a particular area and flooding it with CCTV or putting fence lines all around the houses, etc. That wouldn't necessarily work. So you look for softer, more subtle security measures to meet the security threat analysis. What are those threats? What are those vulnerabilities in any given situation that may be exploiting those threats to deliver a risk? And how can we minimize that risk? CPTED is worth looking at. Even after this little video podcast, maybe worth just checking out if it interests you, because it's a whole subject matter in itself. But in terms of the blocks of flats, it's creating space, owned space around it. So putting in a small, low-level picket fence around the fronts of the, which obviously somebody would have to sort of go through a gate or climb over to get into a space before it goes into the front doors of the blocks of flats. That fence line can be planted up with what they call defensive planting. There are some recognized foliage plants that are slow growers but do a good defensive job. Pyracantha is an obvious one, is a classic. But this defensive planting with boundaries going in, which creates an owned space, is a good environmental measure that can add value to a site. And actually, going back to those other measures we talked about previously, that deterrent effect. Someone's got to cross a deliberate boundary to get to the front door of a block of flats, where they may be going in and out, tailgating, up to mischief, all sorts. Putting soft, subtle barriers in the way, which create a known space, can put an awful lot of people off. So looking at these different crime prevention through environmental design approaches, we also come across a term called natural surveillance. What else is in the air? What other opportunities might there be for people just going about their normal everyday business in the area, but seeing what's going on? Sometimes taking away lots of shielded foliage or whatever can actually expose a site, but give it some more natural surveillance and minimize the risk by offering up a deterrent effect to the opportunist that might want to exploit the fact that there was a screen there in the first place. So let me come out of those. Those are some typical slides that I would use on the course to articulate to the participants the type of solutions, considerations before you jump into the actual design solution itself and jump into exactly how, where you're going to put your cameras, where you're going to have access control, where you're going to put your lighting, where you're going to put your AMPR systems potentially, and all the solutions that we love to play with and love to think about. But when a site security survey is being conducted by a consultant, there's an awful lot more to consider. Some recognized methodologies to consider. Some tools and techniques to have at your disposal when you're going to the consultant, of course, or beg pardon, when you're going to the client to deliver your consultancy services. How professional and efficient can you be with carrying out these tasks? Now, having said all that and given some food for thought around what the considerations would be around a site security survey, that would be a piece of project work that a participant on the main course would go away and work on and come back with their own thoughts. They would give a scenario to work with. And then what do we do? What does the consultant do with all this information? You've done the work, you've been on the site, you've done the legwork, you've got all this knowledge in your own toolkit now, you've got all your notes and whatever you've used to document that. You've had your meeting with your client, you've understood their business, you know what their business is all about, you know how it flows, and how it doesn't flow, what they need from a security solution. What do you do with all that stuff? You document it. You then have to analyze it, make sense of it. Then you're going to have to make some conclusions from your analysis and ultimately make some recommendations. And that's where you put yourself on the line. What are you going to recommend to the client by way of a comprehensive solution? Maybe a variety of options for an appropriate security solution based upon the threat assessment, a layered approach, the documentation, but ultimately you've got to share that with them. How do you do that? Okay, a meeting, a presentation, a report, the consultant's report. Every consultant has to articulate their thoughts, share that with the client, and ideally the way to do that is through a consultant's report. Now that itself is an all new subject matter, very much a key tool in any consultant's toolkit, and maybe that's an opportunity for a further video podcast in talking about how consultants report their findings to the client. Now, for now, that's it from me. Food for thought around site security surveys. Thanks for listening and taking the time to participate in this video podcast. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.